5 books and counting. The Tales from the Omni Vault continues to expand as a universe. Go ahead and check the links down in the description to get your copies today. Hello ladies and gentlemen, I am the Omni viewer, and it seems like people are just looking for reasons to hate Godzilla Kong the New Empire, even going to the point of making arguments that, quite frankly, well, here's the backstory to what brought this video about. Over on Twix, I saw somebody starting a discourse where they were saying, are people really going to cheer every time that there's destruction in a city and lots of people have died and everything? We're really going to celebrate during something that's equivalent to like 5 or 6 9/11s or whatever? I'm paraphrasing a little, but that was the basic gist of it. Basically saying, how dare you celebrate when there was so much destruction and carnage that happened at the end of this movie? That is not something that should be celebrated. Now, me being myself, I quoted it with a kinda snarky but also kinda serious response, in which I said how funny I thought it was that nobody seemed to care about all of the implied deaths and collateral damage in the MCU, but apparently the Avengers are allowed to get away with it. Now, inevitably, some people started responding to that by pointing out that Captain America Civil War exists, and rather than just continue talking about this on Twix, and because I'm determined to ride this train all the way to the station, I've decided it's time for a video response where I have all the time I want/need in order to make my point clear. Now, let's start with that initial idea. This whole thought of, why are we celebrating something when there was destruction that happened? Because at the end of Godzilla Kong the New Empire, when they get to Rio de Janeiro, there's no time for the city to be evacuated when the monsters show up, because it was totally unexpected. So, it is quite possible that there were a lot of people in the buildings that were getting destroyed. We don't actually see anybody die, but it is implied. And I'm not going to try denying that that sort of thing could actually have happened in universe, but I'm still going to say that this argument is incredibly stupid, because it's missing the point of entertainment itself. Look, Godzilla Kong the New Empire is based in spectacle. Nobody is denying that. But that's okay. That's the thing. When a movie wants you to care about the potential human cost of something happening within the confines of the story it's being told, make no mistake, it will let you know. Godzilla Minus One is a good example. Even though there's still a certain degree of spectacle involved with having Godzilla march into Tokyo, the movie also makes it very clear that when he's tearing the city down, people are dying. So we are not meant to be saying, wow, that looks cool. We're meant to be thinking, oh no, that's terrible. And it works. Godzilla Minus One is a prime example of how you can do that sort of thing. Here's the kicker, though. Not every piece of entertainment is like that. There are plenty of movies, plenty of shows, plenty of any kind of entertainment material where that end of the spectacle, that end of the destruction, is de-emphasized. Where you're just supposed to say, oh cool, that building sure got demolished, without necessarily thinking, oh no, there might be people in there. Now, that's not a psychopathic mindset to have, mind you, because anybody who enjoys watching cities get torn down by giant monsters in a movie will turn on the news and see a story about a real building getting demolished with people inside and think that's terrible. Why? Well, hear me out to the end of this, because the movie isn't real. No matter how invested we might get in a piece of fiction, we always know in the back of our minds that the fiction is, well, fiction. That means we know for a fact that no one was actually harmed or killed. Yes, in universe, that sort of thing can happen. And maybe the story wants us to think about it, and maybe we really do get invested in a particular character, so it does hit us when that character dies. But we're not going to grieve for that character the same way we might deal for a real person who is in our lives, because we know it's a fictional character. What this question is essentially telling us is that we have to treat the fiction as reality, especially if we're enjoying it, which is ridiculous. Again, there are stories for which that is expected, but there are plenty of stories for which they're not, and that's fine. It's the same principle as comedy. Comedy, if you think about it, is often based in the misfortune of people, but that misfortune is presented in a funny way, which makes it palatable. If those same misfortunes were to happen to one of us in real life, we wouldn't think it was funny, but when we're watching it happen to someone else, it's hilarious. It's the same idea, just a slightly different genre. It's okay to enjoy that sort of thing, and if it wasn't okay, we wouldn't be making those kind of works. Godzilla, Kong the New Empire falls into that category where we are just supposed to be reveling in the spectacle of it all. But I did still bring up the MCU comparison, so I'd like to elaborate on that a bit. The reason I brought up the MCU in my retort is because I feel like what was being invoked here very specifically is a double standard. I see a lot of double standards applied to this sort of thing anyway, but here in particular, this is a double standard at play because for the first chunk of the MCU, there was all kinds of collateral damage and implied deaths happening in every single movie. And it wasn't something that anybody thought about. It was just part of the process. It was carrying on the tradition from the dozens upon dozens of superhero movies and shows and cartoons and what have you that had preceded the MCU. They all had that sort of thing. And again, unless it was something like Watchmen, where you were specifically meant to get invested in the side characters and upset when collateral damage occurs, otherwise, you weren't expected to think about it. And that's how it went for basically the first 12 movies. Yes, Civil War happened and it was a major plot point, but that was the 13th Marvel movie. I counted. It took them 13 movies to decide that the implied deaths matter. But why did they even decide that in the first place? Well, as far as I can tell, it had to do with a different superhero movie from Marvel's primary competition. In 2013, Man of Steel was released, and very quickly it became a movie that was okay to hate. In fact, it was considered proper to hate it. If you didn't hate it, people questioned your taste in movies. I, for one, am not somebody who hates it, and had my channel existed a few months earlier, I probably would have been one of the most vocal supporters of it, but that can't be changed now. Anyway, because Man of Steel was proper to hate, popular to hate, okay to hate, anything you could extract from it became a point of criticism. And one of those points was how there was a lot of collateral damage, a lot of buildings collapsing and exploding, and implied deaths, or things that we clearly see people just about dying on screen. Maybe we don't actually see the moment where their souls leave their bodies, but it's pretty clear you see somebody floating up into the air and then come smashing back down, they're not gonna recover from that. And people started looking at that and thinking, well, how can people be saying that this is a good movie when there are so many people dying? Why is Superman destroying the city as he's trying to save it? And the few moments where Superman actually was able to save people suddenly counted for nothing because everyone was shifting focus over to the people he didn't save. And the expectation was that he should be able to save everyone because he's Superman. This is kind of the inverse of what the MCU had been doing up to that point. Where, if you look at something like the Avengers, the first Avengers movie, Avengers Assemble for my European audience, There's also a lot of collateral damage and implied deaths in that movie. New York was not able to be evacuated before the Chitauri invaded. Whenever those giant armored space whales are crashing into buildings, there are probably people inside, but we don't think about that because we always see those buildings from the exterior. The one time we get an interior view, we see a whale coming towards the window, but then the Hulk rushes through the building and stops it. So we know those people have been saved. That's where the emphasis was. All of that other damage was basically de-emphasized, and the parts where the heroes were able to actually save people was given greater emphasis. But with Man of Steel, that appeared to be inverted, at least as far as how people perceived the movie. So all of a sudden, that spectacle, the idea that you could just accept that there were implied deaths but still feel relief that the hero was able to save some people, that was no longer good enough. Now you had to care about all that other damage and destruction. And at first, the MCU only responded to it in Age of Ultron by having the Avengers saving as many people as they possibly could have them save on screen without distracting from the fact that they're also fighting Ultron. But then Civil War happened and decided we had to care about all of those previous instances. That in fact the Avengers really weren't able to save everybody, and we weren't thinking about it back then, but we're thinking about it now, 13 movies later. And it's also worth noting that Civil War might not have even happened at all, because a lot was depending on Robert Downey Jr., both if they could afford to bring him back and if he wanted to come back, because you can't really tell the story of Civil War without Tony Stark in it. They were able to get him, but the backup plan was Captain America facing some kind of zombie horde, I believe. So, still lots of dead people involved, but I doubt we're really supposed to be thinking of them the same way we're thinking about the dead people that are brought up in Civil War. Anyway, that's aside from the point. So, now it became a major talking point. Now it was in people's heads. And from that point onward, the MCU valued human life, right? Not really. The movies that continued from there still weren't shy about the collateral damage, but, you know, again, it went back to the tradition of, as long as you see the heroes saving some people, you're not going to think about all the people they're not saving. But then Thanos came along, and there is no way I'm going to let anyone forget about how people reacted to Thanos. For Infinity War, instead of going with his comic book origins in which Thanos is simping for Lady Death, they instead decided to have him be an environmental crusader, or more accurately described, an eco-terrorist, where his goal is to wipe out half of all life in the universe, not to impress his woman, but because he believes that's for the preservation of all the remaining life. A very flawed line of thinking, which makes it kind of terrifying how many pseudo-intellectuals popped up in the wake of that movie and said, you know what? Thanos was the real hero. He was justified. All of those people he wiped out at the end, innocent or guilty, they had to go for the good of the universe. Thanos was right all along. I thought life mattered. I thought it was a bad thing when the heroes couldn't save people that were in danger. And now people were suddenly telling me that wiping out half of all life in the universe indiscriminately is for the greater good. Same cinematic universe, people. And I'm not going to pretend like everybody who was an MCU fan was behind Thanos. Although, as I rewatch Infinity War, it kind of feels like the movie is on his side, because he never gets countered. It kind of feels like maybe somebody involved in making that movie actually believed his rhetoric. I can't prove that, of course, but I mean, the movie never tells him why he's wrong. A lot of people do think he is in the universe. They keep telling him he's a madman, he doesn't know what he's talking about, but they never actually deconstruct his argument. So do you see why I think this is a bit of a double standard here? The MCU got away with all sorts of collateral damage, and it was perfectly fine until the response to another movie decided it wasn't fine, and then we had this weird little moment where a villain basically gave the movie the highest death rate it could possibly get, and he was praised for it, and now people are coming at this movie and saying, so many people have died, you shouldn't be having fun with this movie. Even though, again, it's a work of fiction. And it's not like we're cheering that the people have died. We're cheering that the good guys won, just like we would with any other movie. Godzilla, Kong, Suko, Shimo when she gets redeemed, they beat the Scar King. They beat the villain. They won. That's what people are cheering for. You're also kind of engaging in misdirection if you're trying to say that we're cheering for all of the carnage, which is essentially what the argument is. And like I've said in the past, there are plenty of works of fiction out there in which we're not supposed to be too concerned about if the building is occupied when it comes down. When we are supposed to be concerned, it's very clear. But if it's not emphasized, then it's just for the spectacle. And we all understand that. That's the other thing about this argument. It is really condescending because it's kind of trying to make it out like we don't understand that sort of thing, even though we do. So that's ultimately where I stand on the matter. If you're gonna criticize Godzilla Kong the New Empire, and God knows plenty of people are looking for ways to do so, this argument doesn't hold water. It's a misunderstanding of the kind of genre we're dealing with. Quite frankly, there are a lot of arguments I've heard that are misunderstanding the genre into which the New Empire falls, but whatever, I can only address so many of them in one video. Still, I feel like I've covered this as thoroughly as I can, and I hope it makes sense. I do not like the double standard. I don't like the original argument in general. I think you have to take different works of fiction on their own terms. And the term set forward by Godzilla Kong the New Empire is that it's just meant to be wild and crazy action. And there's nothing wrong with enjoying some wild and crazy action. That's it for now. Until such time as we meet again, this is the Omni Viewer signing off. Thank you all for watching. Now be sure to head down to the description to check us out on other platforms, as well as find links to the 5 current books in the Tales from the Omni Vault universe. Again, thank you all, and we'll see you next time.